Hello, friends. Welcome to the Tech Talk show by Quadrant Knowledge Solutions, where we invite industry experts and technology professionals for addressing the big questions on emerging technology trends and predictions, and also identifying the best practices and deliberating on challenges and opportunities in this area. So, our speaker today is Mr. Samir Sharma, who is founder and CEO of Datazoom. Hello, Samir. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Shekhar. It's a pleasure to be here.
Samir is a keynote speaker at many events, and he also runs the Data Strategy Show podcast, which is voted in the top 10 podcasts of 2022. So, the topic for today's discussion is operationalizing data strategy for delivering business results. It's a known fact that most initiatives in modern business depend on the technology and increasingly on data. So with data enabling better and faster decisions, organizations can even innovate more often, and they can bring new product and services to the market very fast. So, and this also leads to a much improved customer experience. However, how to operationalize a data strategy for delivering business results in real time is a big question for organizations today. So there still seems to be some ambiguity when it comes to the execution of a value-driven concrete plan in this direction. So Samir, my first question to you is, according to you, what is the most important aspect or priority for business leaders today in this area who are trying to operationalize data strategy for business growth?
Sure, Shekhar. It's a good question, actually. When I'm typically asked to go into organizations and work with them to create their data strategy and then subsequently operationalize it, I look for probably 5 things within that, and supporting the C-suite and the board to understand what they need to do in terms of the why, the purpose, and then really working with the -1, the sort of directors and the operational teams, to see what they need to do in order to deliver on that. So the first thing I would say is business strategy and alignment, setting clear and concise strategic objectives. If you, I have been into organizations where, I asked to see a business strategy, and I see very sweeping statements like, we would like to increase revenue, or we want to improve customer experience. That's fine, but actually by how much, and by how, is it by 5%? Do you know what it is now? And do you want to do it by a specific year, or in a specific region, or by a specific product? So I really try and outline what is the absolute clarity behind those strategic objectives. The second thing is, I think, is really getting an understanding of the use cases across the domains and the enterprise. And the reason why is most organizations duplicate. Most organizations duplicate metrics, KPIs, and data, and measure, and how they measure their business. And people will duplicate those measurements using the same data, but getting a different result. It's an old adage. So I think understanding what cuts across the enterprise, so what are common measurements that they're trying to apply to their business, so that the CEO and the C-suite and board might see that. But then what are exclusive and specific in those domains? In finance, what are they really looking at for in terms of measurements? In HR, and then being able to roll that up and understand those specific use cases. The third thing I think is really getting a really robust prioritization mechanism. And it really helps to take a clear, concise view of the use case, and then do some discovery on the data to understand what is available, what isn't available to us because we don't have that data, and therefore the third part of that is, what can you get from an external source that can help you fulfill these use cases? Because we know that there's we get strong value from external types of data. So I think you have to really understand that prioritization mechanism. I've seen many who don't necessarily do that. and drive out their initiatives, not really understanding what they have. The fourth thing is a cost benefit analysis and an approach to ROI. For each of those use cases that you are expecting to deliver, whether they're enterprise wide or whether they're domain specific, you really must move away from we're just doing it. You've got to have a purpose behind it. You're not doing it for the sake of it. You've got to understand the facts and figures behind it. How do you measure that? How do you know how much it's going to cost you? What is the benefit you're going to get from it? And essentially, what is the ROI in terms of investment that the CEO and the board want to see over a period of time? I don't really see that done that much and that well when we are working with people. And number five, I'll be quick. A pragmatic roadmap. So why do I use the term pragmatic? Because I've seen roadmaps which are so complex, so they look like spaghetti junction. I'll probably use that term a little bit later as well. And no one really knows how to deliver on that. So pragmatic, break it into chunks. Don't overcomplicate delivery. Look at each use case and say we can understand the use case. We can understand the assets that that use case is looking at, whether that's people, skills, automation, data, etc. And then we can keep building on those, reusing those assets to rebuild, and not duplicating or not duplicating effort across those, or duplicating data, or workload, and that creates inefficiency. So the one thing that we do is whenever we deliver a use case is we take a slice, we look at the DNA of that use case, and typically we look at how can we apply data governance in it, which gives us more agility. How can we automate it? What are the skills and capabilities that we need? And therefore, you start to work in this real mode of agility for organizations, which doesn't, I must kind of, have my data governance program at a 4 to 5 year program, and I can't do anything until I know that. No, you can do stuff using more agility in your business and being able to move the cogs much quicker if you look at that DNA. So I think those are my 5 points.
Right. Yeah, you perfectly pointed out the use cases and how the data should be looked at in any growing organization. But once we decide on operationalizing the data, that then comes the team performance. So building competitive data teams is also a challenge that organizations are facing today. So how can organizations build active teams, both qualitatively and quantitatively skilled, which can help them in effective data-driven decision making?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of I've certainly seen a lot of organizations hiring the wrong people at the wrong time to deliver something that is just not deliverable in what they want to do, and they don't have enough of the maturity. So when we start to map out the data strategy, we also obviously, which is what most people do, will look at the maturity of the company, the maturity of the skills and capabilities, the maturity of the leadership, the maturity of the processes, the maturity of the technology. I think that's the first time I've mentioned technology, but essentially, how do you start to understand and determine what you need and when, right? So again, I go back to building a pragmatic roadmap. So if you look, if you're looking to prove specific use cases, for example, and to ensure that you can drive that value in your hypothesis of what you're doing, you don't need a big team of data scientists and engineers and this behemoth organization. You need to actually bring together people that are focused around a specific business problem that can be and demonstrate real tangible outcomes around that. So an interesting way for us to do this, and I'm speaking to a number of colleagues around this, is the concept of data commandos. And this is really, you're not bringing, I call it data commandos, but I've got to come up with a much better name, because data on the front of it doesn't really help as much. So perhaps it's another name, but you're bringing key business people, data people, and IT people together. And they're working on an initiative, which is, again, could be domain specific. And they're working together to build maybe an end data product, to drive out those specific objectives. Remember, you always got to tie that back to the business strategy and the objectives. And so, for example, what you could think about is, instead of going out to the market and saying, I need 25 data scientists, but yet I don't know what I'm going to use them for, Why not? One of our clients actually did this. They were going through a round of redundancies, and they decided to redeploy a number of people from key teams, and they retrained them on data governance. And these teams were able to work very quickly because they were business focused to begin with, and they could understand the challenges in each of their domains. They really actually knew a lot of the data quality issues and so on, but they also knew what needed to be delivered. So actually you started to get real traction because you've got business facing people who have been retrained, upskilled, and they can work quicker because they know where the issues and challenges are, and they can not probably, but they can communicate more effectively with the data and IT teams, knowing more about business and data, and then being able to drive out those specific use cases, and really then remedying them, but doing it in such a way that it's iterative. They're working very quickly on it because they know what those challenges are, and they're taking responsibility for those business issues, which drive a lot of those data challenges. So I think, if you are looking at building a team, look at maturity, look at the skills and capabilities, retrain if possible. Don't go out to the market and build a team of people that you don't know what you want to do with them. Build, again, going back to build a pragmatic roadmap that can be delivered, which maps out very simple steps for near-term value, and obviously medium to long term. And maybe in the medium term, you start to bring in those people, you start to hire externally, or you start to retrain again. But I think you've got to build this iterative view of how business teams and IT teams and data teams work together, with more agility, with more cohesiveness, with better language, and a better understanding of each other. And I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing, which can definitely help organizations not go down the route of hiring a legion of soldiers to deliver data, but to do it more pragmatically and with an idea of where they see the value and how they're going to drive that out.
That's true. I specifically like the term data commandos.
Yeah, well, I've got to find a different name for that.
Perfectly suited for this current scenario.
Yeah.
So there comes the next important question, like the aligning the data strategy and technology strategy with the business strategy and goals. This is very, very important for any organization today to achieve the next level of data maturity and lead towards the leapfrogging and becoming sustainable. So what are your observations and recommendations in this area? Because you have worked with many organizations internationally.
So, Shekhar, it's a great question, and I'll tell you why. Because I've seen so many organizations that actually don't know how to align those strategies, right? That's the first thing. I've typically seen strategies that have been left out because they think that they don't need to align. So what we typically do is when we go into an organization, we will first ask, let's see your business strategy. Let's see what that is. Let's see what the levers are. People have nice diagrams. They have normally 6 pillars, and hopefully they've got some really good substance in there, and it's not really just a business plan, but they know where they're going for the next 5, 10, whatever it is, years, and we can help them to be more specific. What I find happens next is that many of those organizations who are attempting to do a data strategy actually leave out all of the other strategies. They look at the business strategy in some way, but they find it difficult to align. And that's for many reasons. They can't uncover what specificities the business wants to achieve. Secondly, you should look at the overall digital or IT or enterprise architecture strategies, and then you should start to build that component into your overall data strategy as well. Align those, but remember, each of those are aligned up to this thing called business strategy. And I'll tell you what, Shekhar, in my career, I would love to stop calling it data strategy and just call it business strategy, honestly, because actually we've come to this point where everybody thinks the data strategy is going to drive something, but they sometimes forget that the data strategy needs to be weaved into all of these, or they need to underpin the business strategy, but they need to be relational in that sense that they feed off each other to drive that business strategy. And I think that's the bit which is the three-dimensional thing that people don't see, or they find it difficult to embed. So what is the one thing that we did? We built something called a data strategy canvas, and that helps overcome problems like this. It helps each of those teams understand each other in from a business lens, and not from a data or a technology, language. And what we're really looking at is, I'll explain it very quickly to you. On the top, we look at business questions. What are the business questions we're going to answer that will drive those strategic objectives? What are the decisions we need to make based on the insights that we get from those business questions? And what are the actions we can take to drive that value and those business results that we need to achieve? But on the other side, we're then thinking, okay, that's great. Now we know how we've set it up. What do we need to find in terms of where the systems are that holds this data to drive those business questions? So now we're linking up, systems with business insights. Then we're saying, well, where is that data that's required, and which system? Is it CRM? Is it ERP? Is it, the finance system? Is it HR? And then you go off and you take those business questions and you say, well, actually, if I'm a data analyst, so on one side it's very business, on the other side you start to get into more of that data discovery piece. Do we have the data that will suffice these business questions, that will drive those decisions and actions? And then we have the second layer of it is really, well, if we're going to drive out, these business questions, what business processes are involved in this? Do they cut across the business? Because actually business processes are the key here, right? Data underpins those business processes. That's another thing that people forget. They will build stuff, but don't realize how it is embedded into the business process, where the trigger points are, what the handoffs are between people. And so we look at the business process. We look at who's going to be consuming this output, the insights or the foresights or the models or whatever it might be. And then we look at what are the external factors, because if I think about some of our clients, they have very deep regulatory practices that are involved from, the regulators and so on that they have to adhere to. Or there are privacy laws out there that they need to adhere to if you're, doing marketing campaigns or whatever it is, or, to specific customers. So you really need to know the external environment. What are the market conditions? What are the competitive factors? And then conversely, you have to look at internal. Do we have the right skills and capabilities to deliver this? As I said earlier, do we have enough change management practices? Another thing that people forget in data strategy that's key is change. And change management really is the driver of how we embed these principles into any business. And can our culture really absorb what we're attempting to do? Yeah, so those are the attributes. And then how do we measure the success? So not just saying, oh, I want to ask, this specific business questions, but what does that mean to measurements? How do we measure the success of our initiatives? And what are we constantly tracking and looking at? And the final thing, I think, I'm going to add this now, because as I'm thinking here, I've just realized there's another box that's missing. Out of all this data that we're accessing, out of all these questions that we're answering, actually, there's a way that we might be able to look at this to say, could we actually monetize any of this data? Could we start to ask those questions? Because while we know we're looking at consumers, but those consumers of the data could be partners, suppliers, distributors. So you look at the supply chain of your activities, and perhaps there's monetization, activities and opportunities in that for you to leverage. So I think that's what has helped, and that certainly helped to drive a lot of activity. And we would always say to our clients, this is the best way to reverse engineer a strategic objective, because that's what we want to do. Most of what I see is people taking a tech-first approach. Let's embed the technology. Let's buy the tools and then work out what we do. That's not really going to help. And 20% of the time, or within 12 months, you might get some value, but actually, then people scratch their heads and said, well, we bought the technology, but nothing happened. So reverse engineer their strategic objectives. We devised and developed that canvas for those reasons, because one of our biggest clients was having these issues and challenges. So, and that was something that's now driving different conversations between teams and actually opening up a lot more possibilities and opportunities. I'll stop there.
Sure. Yeah, I think that seems to be very tedious task of creating some kind of this awareness amongst the leadership team about the aligning of this strategy. But as you rightly said, um, going forward, data strategy should be like a business strategy. That it's there is no
Yes.
question of alignment, but it has to be like one and the same.
Yes,
Correct.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So Samir, you have been working with organizations across sectors. So, what do you think are the biggest challenges or pain points I can say the CIOs or CDOs face today, and how to address them? Do you see their role changing in the next few years?
Yeah, it's really. I mean, I could talk about this for a long time. I think there's a couple of things here. For CIOs, I think that there's a proliferation of data in their organizations. Sorry, of technology in their organizations, which has also meant that there's a proliferation of data, duplication, and so on. So the unraveling of that, building your business architecture, what we call the business data model, should really be the first um, notion when you get started with re-architecting your business for data. And CIOs should be involved in that conversation. And I think it's going to take a while for that to get into the view of the CIO. I mean, lots of enterprise architects will do that. That's their job. But we see a decrease in enterprise architects in business domains and across, a number of businesses. And equally, I'll walk into an organization and say, do you have a data architect, or do you have an enterprise architect? And I often get a very strange look, because they don't, in most cases. So I think looking at the tooling and technologies, that's going to be a big problem for CIOs, because the layering effect has happened for so long. And again, to use that term, spaghetti junction, for you don't know that Spaghetti Junction is a big motorway in the UK that actually has so many crosses and overpasses and underpasses, and that you just look at it, you think, how do I navigate that? And I think that's the biggest issue for CIOs. How do we navigate the stack? How do we, walk through all of the layers of systems that we've put in that don't interact with each other, that don't necessarily, and also they've built APIs for everything, so it's a big mess, and that needs to be looked at. And I think the CIO can work with people like this, the CDOs, to really re-architect their business through data. So that's the one thing. I think CDOs themselves are, we've seen the iterations of CDO. CDO1, which was very focused on, just the basics, the principles. CDO2 trying to get further on into data governance and so on. And then CDO3 now supposedly looking at how to drive value and monetization. But I think we're still stuck with lots of CDOs that are still trying to, um, uh, that are focused on these long drawn out type of, governance programs. And I think there needs to be a better view of how we start to affect and drive the value in terms of revenue and growth. And that's where I think the CDOs of the future, or even now, need to be looking at working with the CIOs to get the real plumbing in place and the infrastructure, but really focusing on how they can drive their teams towards that level of business results that the CEO is looking for in the board. And I think that's the bit which is still not there. And that's why you're seeing tenures of CDOs probably being reduced. And therefore organizations, they are putting CDOs in, but not necessarily, in the right places. And I think the realignment of where reporting structures, and who reports into the CEO or the CIO or the CFO, those things need to be discussed and looked at, because I think one of the CDO's biggest frustrations is really looking at the enterprise and being hampered by a C-suite that they might report into that doesn't give them uh, the enterprise view, the luxury of looking right across the business and really having that autonomy in working with the different lines of business, and driving that value out and delivering those business results. So I think that there's still some way to go, and I think we've got to get away from this whole tech and tooling approach, because most organizations are experiencing difficulties in that because the investments they've made have not paid off. So we've really got to start to think very differently.
True, true. We need to bridge that gap somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think, looking at it through a holistic view, looking at it through the underpinning of the data strategy with the business strategy and really driving out what is of value, building out those hypotheses, looking at those early wins. And then, you can still do all of that foundational work underneath, but you don't focus on foundational work forever. You've got to incrementally build that value on top. So again, driving those use cases, which you think will give you the best, bang for your money, quickly, and then building on and getting into the more complex use cases where will take a little bit more time. But that's essentially what boards and CEOs want to see. They want to see, are you being able to leverage the data in our business? And sometimes they don't even understand what that means, which is an education point. And two, are you delivering business results, and can we see where we're going to get our ROI from? And can can we tangibly see that as revenue growth, or improving customer experience, or efficiency gains, and therefore cost savings? What can we actually see here? So I think it's incumbent on CDOs, or those who are heads of data or so on, to actually drive out that activity and not be focused too way down in the sort of the detail of technology. And I think that's where they need to sort of stand up and be seen and be driving the business parameters that way.
Sure. You mentioned about data monetization. So can you highlight the opportunities and challenges in the data monetization? Would you like to maybe suggest a roadmap for nurturing and transforming organizations' data into a strategic business asset?
Sure. Well, I think I know that we've probably we're very close to the end of our conversation. So I think I'll just give you 5 points, okay? And it's a kind of framework. I mean, one would need to. There's a lot more under these 5 points, but again, create that data. First thing is create that data strategy for your business. Really understand what you have, where it is, what you want to do with it. Don't worry about the how right now, but what you want to do with it, and the purpose of delivering these things. Second thing is, I think you need to create an inventory of your data, because most organizations don't know what they have, what they can do with it, how it will help them internally, and then for them to start to think how it will help them externally. Okay. Third thing is, consider all your potential stakeholders, your customers, your suppliers, your partners, your distributors. You have a value chain. Yeah. They all have interesting pain points and challenges. So that would be that third thing goes into the fourth thing, which is really understand the key pains that you are addressing by building different data and analytics products. Yeah. Whether that's going to be a set of data that you can provide to a particular tangential industry that will help them understand their customers better, because you've got a lot of customer insights aggregated and so on, that you can help support what their activities are in terms of maybe it's marketing activities, or maybe your suppliers, that you can really understand where the most difficult customers are. And that could be a activity that might be a bartering aspect. It may not be monetizable, but it might be something that you can barter, value exchange between two organizations, right? So I think you've got to look at those specific areas. Not every single aspect of what you're doing is going to be monetizable, but you can have value exchange between similar organizations that can help each other drive their business, and they can see relevant increases in revenue, or increases in customers acquisition, or whatever those principles might be. And I think the fifth thing for me is, while you're doing that, while you're understanding those key pains, understanding what products they might need, whether those are outputs from a data, or whether it's building a data product to give them insights into their customers, make sure you understand the relevant security, privacy, and regulatory rules. Yeah, because if you don't know those, you're going to be in for a shock. We've seen everything, Uber recently, and a whole bunch of other people who have absolutely not understood the value in securing and making sure that they stay within some kind of regulatory aspect or framework. So I think those 5 things, I would say, are probably key to building and understanding the monetizable effect of your data, but key principles need to be in there, and you need to ensure that you're doing ethical practices and not really doing bad things with your data. That everybody thinks that monetization is a bad thing, but there are good things that you can do.
Yes, true. That comes to my last question. How can effectively utilizing data add value to enhance the customer experience?
Yeah. I mean, let me give you an example. Look, customer journeys, for example. Most organizations who are, who are selling products will have a customer journey. Yeah, those customer journeys actually, essentially, they think the customer journey works in a specific way. But when you start to understand through data the value of each interaction, understanding what value exchange is happening between the two entities, where they are in the customer journey, at what touch points, measuring that, applying business questions again to that, really understanding whether you need to, that value exchange might be a bit of data or it might be a product or whatever it might be. What we've seen is when we analyze that process, most organizations think they have a customer journey that works like this, but it works like this. So through the data, actually, that tells us that they haven't looked at their processes. They haven't really measured the activity. They don't know where the kinks are. They don't understand those friction points. They don't understand where those bottlenecks are because they're looking at a very high level customer journey through channels. But actually, if you drill down into the data points and if you understand how you measure each of those interactions, those trigger points and so on, we have started to redefine customer journeys. And not every single customer is going to have the same journey. Yeah, they're not going to have the same experience. And so then you can start to segment different customers who might, be able to go down different journeys that need different kinds of products. So you're not doing a one size fits all. You're actually really understanding where those different people are in their journey. And the journey types could then, this person's come to this point of the journey. Actually, it looks like they want to do X. So now we can drop them into another part of the journey. And I think you can do that with data. You can definitely uncover those bottlenecks, those real big challenges that organizations have, and why people don't, buy stuff, and why they're just browsing, or even understanding where those people have come from when they come to your organization, and what you might offer at that point. So, people talk about personalization. It's a very, it's been talked about for the last, 20 years. So how do we start to get better at assessing and reparameterizing, if I can say it, that customer journey and enhancing that customer experience? And you can do that very well through data. And I think that's the bit which organizations should do with their customer experience. And they should start looking, they should redefine the idea of NPS as well, Net Promoter Score, and really start to think, what does that mean? How does it mean? How does it help us in our experience factors? How does it help us in our journey? And look at that from a data perspective really deeply. Don't let your customers off into this customer journey or this process without really understanding what they need to do, when they need to do it, how they need to do it, and what value exchange they need to provide. So I think that is one of the things that we've seen definitely with data, how you can improve customer experience, how you can enhance that for a customer's business, and really start to drive out different activities across that journey.
Perfect. That seems like it's a long way to go for organizations who really want to monetize on the data. Of course, many organizations, they are just sitting on the big data volumes, I believe.
They are.
But because of probably the improper or lack of data strategy, they're not able to really take the value from it. So I believe going forward in the coming years, I think organizations are slowly realizing this factor, and they will definitely get into the proper business strategy for the data monetization.
I hope so, because in 2012, when we started the business, I was pushing a big boulder up a hill for data strategy. The nice thing right now is that many people are talking about data strategy. Yes. Now they're talking about it, but they don't necessarily know how to implement and execute on it. So I think that's the next bit that most people are are probably going to be frustrated at. How do we implement and get value from this thing? So that that's one of the things that we're definitely seeing. Implementation and execution is tough for our
Perfect. So thanks, Samir. Thanks for joining us in the show. It was really pleasure interacting with you. Really touched upon a lot of practical aspects of data, the data strategy and its monetization, as well as the improving the customer value. So I believe this Tech Talk episode will definitely help people to understand more or to get deeply into the data strategy. And you perfectly pointed out a few examples just trying to relate with the actual monetization of data and how people can go ahead with that. So thanks a lot, and we look forward to catching up with you again sometime in the future shows.
Thank you very much, Shekhar. It's been an absolute pleasure, and those were good questions. Thank you so much for having me on the show.